The call came in at 11:47 on a Tuesday night, and I remember the exact time because I had just checked my phone before pulling out of the grocery store parking lot, thinking about whether my sister had remembered to put Lily down at the right time. Lily was 4 months old, asleep in her car seat behind me, and I was 17 minutes from home when the truck ran the red light. I don't remember the impact. I remember the parking lot, and then I remember white ceiling tiles and a voice saying my name, and in between those two things there is nothing, just a blank where 11 minutes used to be. What I didn't know, lying in that hospital bed, was that my sister had already been called. That she had listened to the full situation, understood that her 4-month-old niece needed to be picked up from the scene and held until I was stable, and said no. Just no, and gone back to sleep. Take a second right now and tell me where you're watching this from. Drop your city or your country in the comments below. And I want to ask you something genuinely. If your sibling called you at midnight and told you their baby needed you, what would you have done? Because when I found out what my sister had said that night, I felt something close permanently inside me. And what my grandfather did with one phone call the following morning, I still think about it every single day. My name is Nora. I am 31 years old, and I live in a mid-sized city in the Pacific Northwest with my daughter Lily, who is now 14 months old and has recently discovered that she can open the kitchen cabinets, which is its own kind of emergency, but a manageable one. I tell you that detail because I want you to understand the distance between where I was the night of the accident and where I am now, between that hospital ceiling and this life, which is quiet and ordinary and genuinely mine in a way it had not felt for a long time before everything that happened last spring. I need to go back further than the accident, though, because the accident was not the beginning of the story. It was the moment when a story that had been building quietly for years finally came to a head loudly enough that no one could pretend not to hear it. My sister's name is Danielle. She is 3 years older than me, 34 now, and she is one of those people who is enormously competent in ways that are visible and somewhat less competent in ways that are not. She manages a mid-sized marketing team, maintains a clean and organized apartment, and can put together an impressive dinner party with what appears to be minimal effort. She is reliable in professional contexts, responsible with her finances, and genuinely good at remembering birthdays and sending the right kind of card. People who know her from the outside tend to describe her as someone who has it together. What those people don't see is the way Danielle's love has always operated on a ledger system. She is generous when generosity costs her nothing complicated, when the ask is simple and the inconvenience is minor and the reciprocation is likely. But when something costs her in a way that wasn't budgeted for, when a need arrives on a timeline she didn't arrange, something closes down in her. She becomes very efficient and very reasonable about why she is unavailable, and the efficiency of it is almost more painful than if she had just said something unkind. I didn't fully understand this about her until I became a mother. Or more precisely, until I became a single mother, because that distinction matters to this story. Lily's father, Marcus, and I separated when I was 6 months pregnant. It was not a dramatic separation. There was no betrayal, no catastrophic event, just a slow and honest recognition on both sides that we had chosen each other at a stage of our lives when we didn't yet know ourselves well enough to know we were wrong for each other. We are on good terms now, and he is a present, involved father who has Lily every other weekend and never misses a pediatric appointment. But in those last 3 months of my pregnancy and the first 4 months of Lily's life, I was navigating new motherhood largely alone, in the day-to-day logistical and emotional sense that matters most. I had support. I want to be clear about that. My parents were helpful when they could be, though they lived 40 minutes away and both still worked full-time. Friends showed up in the early weeks with food and company and genuine care. And Danielle was present in the first days after Lily was born in a way that gave me real hope that she would be someone I could lean on through what I understood was going to be a demanding first year. She came to the hospital the day after Lily was born. She held her for a long time and took photographs and cried a little in the way people cry when a baby is new and the world feels briefly very simple and very good. She set up a meal train for my first 2 weeks home. SH. E came over twice in the first month and helped with laundry and held Lily while I slept, and I remember lying in my bed listening to her talk softly to my daughter in the next room and thinking that whatever strain had existed between us before was going to be okay. That becoming mothers, or in her case, an aunt, would simplify something that had always been slightly complicated. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was how gradually, how reasonably, how logically the withdrawal happened. A canceled visit here, she had a work thing, totally understandable. A shortened call there, she was tired, of course she was tired, we were all tired. The meal train ended, and the check-ins became less frequent, and the responses to my messages became slightly shorter, and none of it individually was worth naming. But collectively, it added up to something I felt but couldn't quite point to. Like watching a tide go out so slowly you don't notice until your feet are dry. By the time Lily was 3 months old, I had quietly recalibrated my expectations of my sister. Not abandoned them, recalibrated. I was not asking her for much. I was not leaning on her the way I might have wanted to, because I had understood, without either of us ever saying so directly, that the version of Danielle who had cried at the hospital and talked softly to Lily in my living room was a version that had been available for a limited time. The ongoing version, the Tuesday night at midnight version, was different. I didn't know yet exactly how different. There is a person I have not yet told you about, and he is important enough that I want to introduce him properly. My grandfather's name is Frank. He is 78 years old, and he is the kind of man that the word patriarch was invented to describe, not in the controlling sense, but in the truest sense, the sense of a person around whom a family orients itself, because he has earned that orientation over a lifetime of showing up. He is sharp and warm and funny in the dry, unhurried way of someone who has lived long enough to understand that most things that feel urgent aren't, and most things that matter don't announce themselves. He had been a civil engineer for 40 years, raised 4 children, lost my grandmother 11 years ago, and had since developed the late-life habit of calling each of his grandchildren on Sunday mornings to talk about absolutely nothing in particular for 20 minutes, which was more meaningful than most significant conversations I had in any given week. Grandpa Frank had been present at Lily's birth in the waiting room, had held her in the first hour of her life, and had looked at me afterward with eyes that were wet and said, "She looks like your grandmother did, around the eyes." And I had cried for 10 minutes after he said it, not from sadness, but from the particular feeling of being seen by someone who has known you long enough to recognize what you carry. He knew about the difficulties of my single motherhood without my having to detail them. He was perceptive in the way of people who listen more than they speak. And he knew about Danielle, I think, knew more than I had told him, in the way that grandparents who have watched children and grandchildren long enough develop an understanding that operates below the level of explicit information. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I need to get back to the parking lot, to the 11 missing minutes, to the white ceiling tiles. The accident happened on a Tuesday night in late March. I had done a grocery run after putting Lily in the car seat, one of those quick evening runs for the things you've run out of and can't get through the next morning without. The store was 12 minutes from our apartment. I was careful, as I always was with Lily in the car. I stopped completely at every stop sign. I checked my mirrors. I drove the way you drive when you are acutely aware that what matters most to you is strapped into the seat behind you. The truck that ran the red light was driven by a 23-year-old man who had been awake for 19 hours and had fallen asleep at the wheel for what his insurance company would later estimate was approximately 4 seconds. 4 seconds. The physics of 4 seconds on a road can be extraordinary. He hit the passenger side of my car at approximately 40 miles per hour. My car spun across the intersection and came to rest against the curb on the opposite side. Lily was uninjured. The car seat did exactly what it was designed to do, and my daughter sat inside it in the stopped car and cried the way babies cry when something sudden and loud has happened, and they are frightened but intact. A woman named Carla, who had been walking her dog and witnessed the accident, reached my car before anyone else. She opened the back door and spoke to Lily and kept her calm until the paramedics arrived. Carla is a stranger I will be grateful to for the rest of my life. I had a concussion, 2 cracked ribs, a lacerated shoulder from the seatbelt, and enough bruising across my left side to make the ER physician look at the imaging for a long time before telling me I was, in his words, very fortunate. They kept me overnight for observation. Lily was checked and cleared and needed to be placed with a family member while I was admitted. The hospital called my emergency contacts in order. Marcus, Lily's father, was in another state that week for a family obligation, a fact that I had known, and that was why I had been managing solo for those particular days. He was called and was immediately booking a flight but was hours away. My parents were next, my mother answered, heard the situation, and was already in her car before the call ended. But she was 40 minutes away, and it was midnight, and there was still the immediate question of where Lily went in the next 30 minutes. So the hospital called Danielle. She was 20 minutes away. She was Lily's aunt. She was the next contact on my list because I had, 4 months after Lily was born, still believed that Tuesday night at midnight was a version of need she would meet. She did not meet it. The nurse who called her told me about it the next morning, gently and with the particular careful neutrality of someone who has seen many things and learned to report them without editorializing. Danielle had answered, had understood the situation fully. Her sister was in the ER with a concussion and cracked ribs. Her 4-month-old niece was at the scene and needed to be collected and held. Had said that she had work in the morning and wasn't able to come out at this hour, and that surely my mother could handle it, and had ended the call. My mother had arrived 47 minutes after the accident. Carla, the stranger with the dog, had sat in the back of a paramedic vehicle with Lily on her lap talking softly to her for 47 minutes. A stranger had done what my sister had declined to do. I didn't know this when I woke up. I knew I was in a hospital bed and my ribs hurt enormously and my head felt like it was full of wet sand. And the first thing I said when I regained full coherence was Lily's name. And my mother, who was sitting in the chair beside my bed, said immediately, "She's here. She's safe. She's asleep in the next room in a bassinet, and she is completely fine." And I breathed out something that I think was the largest single exhale of my life. My mother told me what had happened, about Carla, about the 47 minutes, about Danielle, sometime around 8 in the morning when I was alert enough to receive it. She told it quietly and without drama, the way my mother tells things she knows are going to land heavily. She held my hand while she told it. And when she finished, she didn't say anything else, just held my hand, and I looked at the ceiling of the hospital room and I thought about my sister picking up a phone at midnight, understanding exactly what was being asked of her, and going back to sleep. I didn't cry. I wanted to, but something had shifted past the place where crying was the appropriate response. What I felt was colder and more final than tears. It was the feeling of a door closing, not being slammed, just closing, with a quiet and definitive click. But that wasn't the worst part. What I discovered next truly changed everything, and it came from a direction I hadn't expected. Grandpa Frank called my mother's cell phone at 9:15 that morning. He had heard. Someone in the family had called him the night before. I was never sure exactly who, and he called to check on me and on Lily. My mother handed me her phone, and I talked to him for a few minutes, my voice still hoarse and my ribs registering a complaint at every breath. "Nora," he said, and his voice had the particular quality it got when he was being careful. "I know about Danielle. Mom told you. Your cousin called me last night. How are you feeling about it?" I considered lying to him and decided against it. You don't lie to Frank. Not because he punishes dishonesty. He doesn't, but because his capacity for patient, quiet reception makes dishonesty feel like an insult to the quality of his attention. "I feel like a door closed," I said. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I need to make a call. You rest. I love you, sweetheart." I didn't know what call he meant. I handed the phone back to my mother, and I lay back against the pillow, and I closed my eyes, and I slept for another 2 hours. What Grandpa Frank did with that phone call, the single call he made that morning while I was sleeping, I would learn about piece by piece over the following days, partly from him and partly from the ripple effects that moved outward through the family in the days that followed, the way ripples move when you drop something significant into still water. He called Danielle. I don't know every word of that conversation. Frank told me the shape of T, and Danielle told me fragments of it later, when she was in a different place than she had been. And from those pieces, I have assembled something close to the whole. He did not yell. Frank has never yelled, as far as anyone in our family can recall. He simply said what was true in the way that a man of 78 who has buried a wife and raised 4 children and watched the world reorganize itself multiple times says true things, without decoration, without performance, with the full weight of someone who has earned the right to be heard. He told her that a stranger had held her 4-month-old niece in the back of a paramedic vehicle for 47 minutes while she slept. He told her that her sister had been lying in an emergency room with a concussion and cracked ribs, and that the first coherent word out of her sister's mouth had been her daughter's name, and that when you are that person, when you are the one calling for your child from a hospital bed, you need to know that the people on your emergency contact list are going to answer. He told her that he understood everyone was tired and everyone had work in the morning, and that life was genuinely demanding. And then he told her that none of those things were reasons, that there was a category of need that existed outside the logic of inconvenience, and that a 4-month-old child at the scene of a car accident at midnight was that category, and that if she had not understood that before, she needed to understand it now. And then he said, and this is the part Danielle told me herself, months later, sitting in my kitchen with her hands wrapped around a mug of tea, her voice different than I had ever heard it, he said, Danielle, I love you, and I need you to understand that the person you were last night is not the person I raised your mother to raise. You have time to be different, but you don't have unlimited time, and neither does Nora. Danielle told me she sat with the phone in her hand for a long time after that call ended, that she didn't go to work that morning, that she sat in her apartment and thought about the version of herself that had heard a nurse say her sister's name and her niece's age, and had made a calculation and gone back to sleep, and found that she could not make that version of herself feel reasonable no matter how she tried. That the logic she had applied at midnight, work tomorrow, Mom can handle it, not my emergency, collapsed entirely when she looked at it in daylight. And that what replaced the logic was something she didn't have a tidy name for, something that was part shame and part grief, and part a recognition of her own capacity for a kind of selfishness she had never wanted to see in herself. She came to the hospital that afternoon. I was sitting up in bed when she came in, Lily awake and alert in my arms, doing the thing she had recently started doing where she grabbed at whatever was closest with enormous conviction. Danielle stood in the doorway for a moment before she came in, and her face was different, not composed, not managed, not operating behind the usual efficient surface, just open, raw in a way I hadn't seen on her since we were children. She sat down in the chair beside my bed, and she looked at Lily and she said, "Can I hold her?" I handed Lily to her without speaking. Danielle held my daughter and she cried. Not politely, really cried, the kind of crying that has been held back too long and arrives all at once, messy and real. And she said, "I'm sorry, Nora, I'm so sorry. I don't have a reason that's good enough and I'm not going to pretend I do. I'm sorry." I watched her hold my daughter and I felt several things simultaneously. The residual cold anger of the door that had closed, and something older and more complicated underneath it that was the love of a person for a sibling, which does not disappear simply because it has been hurt. I didn't forgive her immediately. That would have been dishonest. But I also didn't send her away. "I need you to understand something," I said. "Being Lily's aunt is not a good weather position. It doesn't exist only when it's convenient. If you want to be in her life, really in her life, you have to be willing to be someone she can count on when the weather is bad." "I know," she said. "Grandpa called you." She looked up. "Yes." "What did he say?" She told me, and when she got to the part about the stranger in the paramedic vehicle, when she said out loud that a woman named Carla who had been walking her dog had held Lily for 47 minutes while she slept, she had to stop for a moment before she could continue. And in that pause, I watched something move through her face that I believe was genuine reckoning. Not performed, not managed. The real thing. The months that followed were not linear. Healing, of ribs, of relationships, of trust, does not move in a straight line. Danielle showed up differently. Not perfectly, not immediate. Why, but consistently and in ways that required her to be inconvenienced. She took Lily on a Saturday, so I could sleep without interruption for the first time in months. She answered when I called even when the timing was bad. She came over on a Thursday evening with takeout and no agenda except to be present, and she sat on my couch and played with Lily on the floor for 2 hours, and it was ordinary in the best possible way. We have had honest conversations, harder ones than we have ever had before, about the years of ledger system love, about what I needed that she wasn't providing, about why she had found it so difficult to show up for the messy, inconvenient, non-reciprocal kind of care that a new single mother needs. Some of those conversations have been painful. Some have landed somewhere that feels like genuine understanding. We are still in the middle of it, which is the honest answer about where most meaningful family repairs actually exist. Not resolved, not finished, but in the middle doing the work. Grandpa Frank came for Sunday dinner 3 weeks after I was discharged from the hospital. He sat at my kitchen table and held Lily and talked to her in the unhurried way he talks to everyone, as though she were a full person whose opinions on the matter were worth soliciting. Danielle was there. It was the first time the 3 of us had been in a room together since the accident. The evening was careful and warm and not without its awkward silences, but it was also genuinely something, a beginning of a different configuration of us, arranged more honestly than what had existed before. At the end of the night, when Danielle had gone and Lily was asleep and I was walking Frank to his car, he stopped on the porch and looked at me with those eyes that have always seen more than they let on, and he said, "You doing all right, Nora?" "Really?" "Really," I said. "I think so." He nodded. He put his hand on my shoulder for a moment, the way he has done since I was small, and then he said, "Your grandmother would have been crazy about that baby, completely irrational about her." He shook his head, smiling at something I couldn't see. "Good irrational." I stood on my porch and watched his car until the taillights disappeared around the corner, and I felt something I want to try to describe accurately because I think it matters. It was not happiness exactly, and it was not the absence of pain, and it was not resolution in any clean narrative sense. It was something more like alignment, the feeling of a life that has been through something real and come out the other side still intact, still oriented around what matters, still held by the people who show up. I think about Carla sometimes, the woman with the dog who held my daughter for 47 minutes and asked for nothing. I tracked her down through the police report and the paramedic crew and sent her a letter, which felt entirely inadequate and was the best I could do. She wrote back, a short, warm note that said she was glad we were both okay, and that Lily had, in her words, excellent grip strength for someone her age, and made her laugh. I have that note on my refrigerator. I look at it most mornings. Here is what I know, 14 months out from that parking lot. The people who show up at midnight are not always the people you expected. Sometimes they are strangers with dogs. Sometimes they are grandparents in their 70s making careful, honest phone calls. Sometimes they are sisters who needed to be shaken loose from their own limitations before they could arrive. And sometimes, maybe most of the time, the most important thing you can do is stay clear about what you need. Stay honest about what happened, and stay open to the people who are willing to do the work of becoming someone you can trust. Lily has excellent grip strength. She opens every cabinet she can reach and looks at me over her shoulder with an expression of pure satisfied mischief that I am told I also had at this age. She does not know the story I just told you. She will someday, in whatever version of it is appropriate to the age she is and the people she loves. But right now she knows that she is held, consistently, reliably, by people who will answer the phone at midnight. And that is what I most wanted her to know first. If this story reached something in you, if you have a Danielle in your life, or if you have been the Danielle and you know it, leave me a comment. Tell me what you did with that knowledge. And if you believe, the way I do, that the people who show up in the hard moments are the ones worth building your life around, hit the like button and subscribe. I'll be here every week with more stories, real, imperfect, genuinely human stories, and I don't want you to miss a single one.